Thanks for joining me. I'm Molly Knight. I'm standing for the Senate in New South Wales for the Health Australia Party. And we're called the Health Australia Party because we want all aspects of Australia to be healthy. The people, the environment, the economy, our land, our society, all dependent on each other to bring about a healthy, robust Australia. Now, for those of you who know me personally, and especially my patients, you know I have a great concern about what's happening with natural medicine in Australia. We are not being told the truth. We are not being given a fair go or an equal footing with pharmaceutical companies, which is where natural medicine needs to be. So it really is time for change, and it's especially time we had more choice. And so I stand up for you and me, for this amazing country we live in. And I want it to be all it can be, to be better, to have an honest and accountable government that serves you and me. And that's why I'm standing for the Senate in this upcoming election. Now, something that I'm really passionate about is getting the truth to my patients. And I can tell you, they often get an earful. And I'm going to do another 3 talks before this election, so you can get an earful too, on different issues. So you can see where I'm coming from and get a feel for what the Health Australia Party stands for and why I'm so aligned with their policies. Tonight, I want to talk to you about food. The foods that you are eating are affecting your health, obviously, yeah? For better or for worse. You are, after all, what you eat. And the foods we have available to us aren't necessarily that good for us. Later in the talk, I'll give you some options that you can use to help keep your body healthy. And you can send in any questions you may have in the comments section below. So I was listening to Bill Shorten on Q&A the other night, and he said, 1 in 2 will get cancer in their lifetime. So he's going to add more dollars to Medicare to cover the gap that people have to pay. And I think that's great. But I say this to Bill, why aren't you looking at ways to prevent cancer in the first place? Why aren't you saying 1 in 2? That's 50% of our population are going to get cancer. This is an epidemic, and we must look at ways to prevent it. Not just treat it and manage it as if cancer is an inevitable consequence of life. It's not. There are so many causative factors of cancer and other chronic illness. It's overwhelming our society, and food is one of them. Our foods are laden with chemicals, preservatives, anti-caking agents, mold inhibitors, flavor enhancers, colors, sweeteners, emulsifiers, stabilizers, thickeners. Oh my goodness. Food with all these chemicals added to it is not really food anymore, is it? It's a chemical cocktail. And we eat it. You know, babies are born with around 300 chemicals in the cord blood. That's been their lifeline. So these little souls are starting off behind the 8 ball. And this chemical contamination that we all carry around these days in every single cell in our body ultimately adds massive costs to our healthcare system as more and more people experience disease and chronic illness, both physical and mental, from eating the available chemically processed foods on the shelves that are supposed to be safe for us. Now, when I was growing up, we didn't have supermarkets. Perhaps they existed in the cities in the very early 50s, but I grew up in Armidale in New South Wales. It's a small country town, and we had our grocery stores, we had our corner stores, but no supermarkets. There were a few canned foods available. There wasn't much. There certainly weren't any frozen foods. Milk was delivered to the house, and I'd run out with my little billy and it would be filled. Bread was delivered in the same way, fresh bread. Each day. There was no such thing as sliced bread back then. I'd run out and get the loaf, and many a times I couldn't resist the smell, and you know, it came as a rounded loaf, so I'd pull it open and eat some of the centre. It was delicious and warm. So what have we had in the last 50 to 60 years? It's an explosion. Our prepackaged and processed food industry has exploded. Anything you want can pretty well be purchased in our supermarkets these days. Gone is the day of the green grocer, although they are popping up more and more in markets, aren't they, as people want cleaner, healthier foods. Now, if we took all the foods out of a supermarket that really weren't good for us, you know, we wouldn't need supermarkets at all. For instance, when I bake my biscuits, they have to be eaten within a few days, maybe a week, or they will go soft, then they grow mold. Yet, when I go into a supermarket and see the use by date on a packet of biscuits, like I did today, 9 to 12 months these biscuits will last for. So I know this product is a bunch of chemicals disguised as a biscuit. Oh, that's harsh, Molly, you say, but it's true. And you are consuming many, many chemicals, which, by the way, are not all listed on the package. Now you say, that's not right, Molly. We have all ingredients listed on our foods. After all, our government is looking after us, right? Well, no, actually they aren't really looking after you, and they certainly don't have your back. If they did, they wouldn't have allowed all these chemicals into our foods in the first place. Now, in a processed packaged product, if an ingredient which includes food additives weighs less than 5% of the finished product, it doesn't have to be listed. So you don't know if there is one additive or if there's 100 additives in the product that you're buying. However, if additives in the compound ingredient perform a purpose in the final food, they have to be declared in the statement of ingredients. It's really complex, isn't it? So in an ideal world, all the ingredients, all the additives would be listed. And that's something I believe we must have. Clear, complete product listing. So we can have a choice when we're shopping. We can choose whether to buy a product or not. Now, no company could list all the ingredients, I guess depending on how many are in it, because, well, who knows what's in it. But some products might have to be sold with a small booklet listing all the chemicals. But that doesn't change the fact that it's simply not good enough to produce a food item and not have to list what's in it. For instance, many years ago, must be at least 20 years ago, I saw a patient who was an exec in a large bread making company. And I said to this patient, you have to stop eating wheat. And the patient said, well, is it the wheat or is it the chemicals? I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, we add 34 chemicals to our bread. Okay, didn't know that. So the next day, I actually went to the supermarket and checked out a loaf of bread. It's a nice, neat little box. Wheat and yeast and sugar and all the things are listed. 2 chemicals were listed. So the rest of those additives, those chemicals, must have been hidden under the 5% escape clause. Absolutely not good enough, I say. The other aspect of having all these food additives in our foods is that there is no control or warnings for body weight. So by that I mean, if you as an adult consume, let's say, a chocolate bar, and a 5-year-old consumes the same chocolate bar, the effects of that food and the chemicals in it will have a profoundly different effect on the child to you, to the adult. Their body weight and their ability of their organs to digest, absorb and detox any nasty chemicals in it is vastly different to adults. When I left school and started nursing, I only ever knew of a handful of children over a few years that actually had cancer. But now we have whole wards dedicated to children with cancer. There's something terribly wrong with this picture. And without hesitation or doubt, I believe that our processed foods are a big part of the cancer jigsaw. So what types of illness do some of these food additives cause? Well, cancer is one of them. Asthma and allergic reactions, certainly associated with some chemicals such as the sulfites and nitrites and nitrates, and these two chemicals in particular prevent discoloration of your processed meats, and they are considered to be like one of the worst food additives that we have. So next time you think about buying your processed meats, take your garlic and your wooden cross with you and run fast. Don't buy those products. So some other symptoms are bowel symptoms such as nausea, diarrhea can be certainly part of an allergic reaction. Now this is interesting because preterm delivery, so preemie babies, there is a link to artificial sweeteners. And this is according to a couple of studies done. One was in 2010, a study from Denmark, and in 2012 there was a study done in Norway. And if you think about a lot of products that have artificial sweeteners in them, and a lot of young people like sweetened things, something to consider. Hyperactivity and attention deficit disorder in children. Well, yep, most parents know that some of those coloured foods, the lollies and so on, spell disaster for several hours. MSG is probably the best known food additive, isn't it? It can cause very serious side effects for some people, from mild headaches, severe migraines, sweating, heart palpitations, rash, flushing of the body, and anaphylaxis as well. I've seen a couple of patients who would go into anaphylactic shock if they were in contact with MSG. So it's very, very serious. Some people can have an increased risk of heart disease if there's an accumulation of phosphates. And weight gain, of course, from added sugars and sweeteners, and some substances can interfere with hormone regulation as well. And there's neurologic problems such as, memory loss and fuzzy head and confusion. It sounds a bit grim, really, doesn't it? What do we do? How do we get away from this? So let's look at first, we have the use of the best before dates or the use by dates. And that's simple, it's easy to understand. However, I do have an issue with meat. So I would always buy my meat fresh and put it into my fridge as soon as I got home. I might buy, 2 or 3 days worth, even carry it home in a cool bag to make sure it was carried safely. And I always would buy the meat with the longest use by date stamped on it. But I had several issues where when I went to get my meat to cook it, it was clearly off. Now, despite being well within the use by date, the first couple of times it happened, I just tossed it out. But by the third time this happened, I was over it. So I went back to Coles, took my meat back. The girl called the butcher up and he was happy to replace it. But I was quite angry as this wasn't the first time it had happened. And having to take it back, it takes time and effort and so on. And when I questioned the butcher about how this could possibly happen when it was within the stamped use by date, the butcher said, and I quote, "Well, your fridge isn't as cold as our fridges are, and those dates are really for us." There you go. Silly me, thinking it was for the consumer. No, apparently it's so they know when to put the price down to sell the meat quickly. Well, I did say to him, if that's the case, you really should have a sign telling the consumer, hey, don't bother with the use by date, just buy the meat you're going to cook tonight. Well, of course, that hasn't happened. And now Coles are advertising no added hormones in their fresh meat. So I called to get some clarification around this advertising. I couldn't get a straight answer. And in fairness, the young chap was obviously just reading a script. And I was left with, we will get back to you. So I'm left thinking, does this mean they used to add hormones to their meat? And if so, how did they do that? Or do they mean the animals are no longer given added hormones in their feeds and so on? And does it mean that they're given some hormones but not above the legal levels that they're allowed to have in the feed? Who knows? So when a product states no added something, no added sugar, no added preservatives, no added hormones, it doesn't necessarily mean that there is none of that substance in the product. It just means it's in there, but it's not above the legally allowed limit. So when you see no added, preservatives, no added sugars. You can almost count on it being in there. If it were to have absolutely no sugar at all, it would state no sugar added. It's simple but deceptive wording. So we need change. We deserve to have choice in what we buy. We all must insist on having foods correctly labelled. What's in them? Where does the food come from? When do we have to use it by? So what can we do ourselves at home to lessen the impact of these additives, these chemicals added to our food? And there are a few things you can do, of course. You can grow your own fruit and veggies. That's pretty simple. Have a chook or two at home. Eat locally so you know what you're eating. The best thing you can do is keep your liver supported so it can efficiently get rid of the toxins. So to your diet, make sure you're having some vegetables like cabbage, Brussels sprouts, dandelion greens, broccoli, lemon, and grate the lemon peel and eat that. It's so good for you. Garlic, coriander, and not just the leaves, but the roots as well. They're very good at detoxing your body. Ginger, apples. Now, the pectin in apples helps to purge toxins from the bloodstream. It also helps lower some cholesterol. Now, drink good water. Drink reverse osmosis filtered water. Or if you buy water, get it in a bottle, a glass bottle. And it is available. Most of it's in plastic, but you can get some in glass. Now, include herbs such as dandelion root. You can make a cup of tea out of dandelion root. St. Mary's thistle, burdock, calendula, and you can get them as bulk herbs in your health food shop. Eat some probiotic foods like sauerkraut and kimchi. Add it to your diet. Add it gently because these things are very powerful. And you know, it really is pretty well impossible to avoid chemicals altogether. We have allowed a chemically toxic world to develop, and it's time to make some changes. We need transparency in our food labelling so we can have choice around what we buy. I tell you what, we all deserve that. Okay, so let's have a look at some questions. I don't know if questions have been running. I'm sorry. Let me just have a little look here. Kathy, sorry, bear with me, guys. I'm really not very good with these computer things. Kathy says, so many kids have difficulty concentrating in class. Yeah, well, you know, there's a few things too. What do they have for breakfast? You know, breakfast cereals are, well, they're full of sugar to start with. So, and they're heavily processed, breakfast cereals. I always liked, for my kids anyway, I always used to try and have an egg each morning for breakfast. Gives them a good protein, piece of toast, something like that. Kate says, yes, prevention. 50% of the population getting cancer is unacceptable. It is unacceptable. It's madness to allow that to be the case. And I think it's great that you know, the leader of the opposition, if he gets in, wants to put more money into funding these people. Because I remember seeing on the ABC, this woman was in the middle of a cancer treatment. She had a port, so she was clearly having ongoing treatment, but it had already cost her $25,000. Who can afford that? You know, people have to sell their houses just to have this treatment. And treatment that I think, hello, if we had better controls on our food industry, what's sprayed on our fruit and vegetables, what fertilizers are used, what chemicals are allowed to be added to our food, maybe, just maybe, we wouldn't have this epidemic. So we have to all stand up. We have to shout out. Half the population, they rave on about having an aging population. Seriously? I don't think they're going to need to worry about an aging population. Half of them aren't going to be here. Okay, anything else? Let's have a look. Sorry, I'll just, what would be the worst additives to stay away from, as sometimes it's hard to avoid them all? It's very difficult to avoid them. we live in a very fast-paced world, and we all like convenience. I do too. So to try to only eat homegrown or organic, chemical-free, the best of everything, it really is almost impossible. And certainly if you eat out, you have no idea what you're getting. So I think the best thing to say is really stay away from heavily processed foods, that, you know, your processed meats, those they're a little bit nasty. Anything in a packet is it's not your best friend. So as much as possible, just eat as clean as you can, but you won't avoid chemicals altogether. That's just a fact. It's a bit like technology. We can't avoid it. We have to do the best we can to safeguard ourselves. Look after your liver. Get some dandelion root. You know, it's about $10 at the health food shop. Have a cup of dandelion root tea every day. It's pretty simple. Kate says, I get really sick from MSG. I check food labels, it says no added MSG or even no MSG, but I still get sick. I think MSG must be hidden in foods, but not included in labels. Yeah, I think, and you may need to correct me here, people, but I think MSG has about 120 or 140 different names that it can hide behind. That makes it almost impossible to follow, doesn't it? So of course, when it says no added MSG, you know that there's probably going to be MSG in it. So you just have to do the best you can. And again, just have as much fresh fruit and veggies and organic when you can. But sometimes that's even hard to get, really hard to get. And next week I'm talking about glyphosate. So catch me for that, because that's a really big one, and it's something that we really have to address. Okay, let's have a look. Sorry, while I look down here. Are gluten-free products full of sugar to compensate for taste? Is it worth being on a gluten-free diet if this is the case? Thanks, Kathy. The processed foods in the supermarket, the gluten-free ones, are full of sugar. That's just a fact. And does it compensate for the taste? Yeah, I guess so. But you know what? I make all my own biscuits. I make cakes. I make my pizza base. I make pastries. I make my bread, and I don't laden them with sugar at all. So, you know, they can be made to be delicious without having to be packed with sugar. And sugar is a preservative too. It does help preserve. So that would be one of the factors in why they might add so much. But it's very sad, because the gluten-free products that are available, there's some lovely things and a great variety now. It's really lovely, but not necessarily your best friend. Maybe for occasional, but you know, you're going to have to learn to make some if you really want to look after your body as well as you can. Trevor says, hi Molly, thanks for the great advice. I agree with transparency, GMOs, nanotechnology, titanium dioxide, and if it's a contributor. Offhand, I can't say I know enough about it, and I would have to, you know, research it. I'm not sure what number titanium dioxide is, but if it's almost everything, well, it has to be a factor, doesn't it? And the question, I guess, is why isn't it labelled? And we're all hoodwinked. I think that's the greatest thing that distresses me, is that we're hoodwinked into thinking it's all okay, and we go about our lives hoping that it'll be all right, and then we get a slap in the face because we get sick, or our husband or wife or kids or friends get sick, and you sort of wonder, how did that happen? Well, we've let it happen because we've been asleep. We've been asleep while governments and big corporations choose what we can eat and what we can't eat, and what will be in our products. I want choice. I want to know what I'm putting in my body. And that's why I'm going to stand up. Hopefully you all will vote for me, get me into the Senate, so that we can have a real voice, a voice of common sense, a voice of but really does care, not about the money and, you know, whatever these people, well, do, but anyway, won't go there. Let's have a voice that cares for the people, for the land, which I'm talking about the environment tomorrow night, so come and listen. And vote for me. Vote 1, Senate New South Wales for Molly, for the Health Australia Party. Let's make a difference, everyone. Let's stand together. Thanks, everyone. Good night for now.